The desert was already bleeding into night when the first gunshot cracked across the wasteland. The sound rolled like thunder against the cliffs, scattering a pair of vultures from their roost. Dust swirled, shadows lengthened, and a rider collapsed into the dirt, his horse screaming as it bolted into the dark. The silence that followed was heavier than the shot itself. Out here, silence always meant something was waiting. Something cruel. Something inevitable. Elias Kane sat his saddle a half-mile away, watching the dying man writhe in the distance. He did not ride to him, nor did he ride away. He simply lit a cigarette, the match flare lighting the deep cuts and shadows of a face that had seen too much. The desert had already taken his family. It could claim another soul without his interference. Still, he watched until the man stopped moving. Then he spurred his horse forward toward Dry Creek, a town so small and sunburned it barely clung to life. The ride into town was silent except for the squeak of leather and the faint rattle of spurs. Elias looked like a man built from the desert itself, skin weathered, eyes scorched, hands resting too naturally near the iron at his hip. He had once worn a badge, carried law with a steady hand, but that was years ago, before raiders had burned his home and carved his family from him. The law had failed him. Faith had failed him. Now only the revolver remained. It spoke cleaner than promises. Dry Creek did not welcome strangers. Doors shut as Elias passed, boots scraped hurriedly off the street. He dismounted at the saloon, tied his horse to a post, and walked inside. The stink of sweat, whiskey, and fear hung thick in the air. Conversations hushed as soon as he stepped across the threshold. At the bar stood 3 men with serrated smiles and the kind of swagger that came from having blood on their hands. The Serrano brothers. Their gang had bled Dry Creek dry, taking what they wanted when they pleased. Tonight, their pleasure was found in mocking a young widow whose trembling hand clutched a glass of watered whiskey, her child pressed against her skirts. "Dance for us, pretty," one of them sneered, jabbing a dirty finger into her ribs. The boy whimpered, and another brother shoved him to the floor. Laughter erupted, sharp, cruel, like knives on stone. Elias ordered a drink and said nothing. He wasn't here to play savior. But then the youngest boy let out a scream when a boot struck his side, and Elias's hand moved without thought. He pivoted, iron clearing leather in a blink. The first shot split the laughter in half. The second silenced it altogether. One brother dropped with a bullet in his chest, another with his jaw shattered. The third staggered backward, eyes wide, whiskey glass slipping from his hand and shattering against the floor. For a heartbeat, the saloon was deathly quiet. Then came the screams, chairs scraping, men diving for cover. Elias stood in the center of it all, smoke curling from his revolver, expression unreadable. "Pick the boy up," he said to the mother, his voice flat as stone. She obeyed, clutching her child with shaking arms. The surviving Serrano brother bolted for the door, clutching his blooded face, and Elias knew the message would spread before dawn. More were coming. Dozens. He holstered his gun and downed the whiskey he hadn't touched, the burn anchoring him for what lay ahead. As he stepped outside, the night air pressed against him, hot and dry. The town watched from cracks in shutters, eyes wide with the kind of fear that never spoke aloud. Elias adjusted his hat, prepared to mount up and vanish into the desert again, but a small hand caught his sleeve. The girl. The widow's daughter. Her eyes were too wide, too knowing for her years. She looked at him as if he were something more than a man. As if he were an answer. "Don't go," she whispered. "My daddy's gone. Mama says God don't send men like you by accident." Elias froze, cigarette smoke curling between them. Her words struck deeper than any bullet could. His jaw tightened, the weight of her plea dragging up ghosts he had tried to bury. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he pulled free gently, mounted his horse, and stared at the horizon where thunder rolled like drums of war. He told himself it was none of his concern. He told himself he was no savior. But as he rode into the dark, the girl's voice echoed in his ears, following him across the barren land. Behind him, the saloon door swung open, and whispers chased him into the night, whispers that spoke his name like a curse, like a warning. The desert swallowed him whole, but far behind, hoofbeats began to stir. The Serranos were coming. And this time, they would not stop until every drop of blood was paid back in kind. Elias did not look back. He didn't need to. He could already feel the weight of their pursuit. He lit another cigarette, let the match flare against the wind, and muttered under his breath, half to himself, half to the dead men who haunted him. "Hell's already on my trail. Might as well ride with it." And with that, he disappeared into the black horizon, where storm clouds gathered and the promise of violence waited. The storm broke over Dry Creek before dawn, lightning carving jagged scars across the sky while rain churned the dust into mud. Elias returned to the town he had tried to abandon, boots soaked, hat dripping, revolvers heavy on his hips. He tied his horse to the post outside the saloon and stepped through the swinging doors as if walking into his own grave. Inside, a few stubborn townsfolk huddled together, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Fear had settled over them like smoke. Elias ordered whiskey but did not drink it. Instead, he sat at a corner table, sharpening a knife by lantern light, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Word of the killings had spread faster than the storm. The Serrano brothers were gathering their riders. By noon, they would be here, 30 strong, eager to avenge the blood spilled on the saloon floor. The widow approached him, her shawl clinging damp to her shoulders, anger flashing in her eyes. She accused him of bringing death to her door, of lighting a fire that would consume them all. Elias didn't argue. He had lived too long to believe in innocence. But when the little girl appeared beside her mother, clutching stale bread wrapped in a cloth, his defenses faltered. She offered it to him with a shy hand, whispering that he reminded her of her father. The word struck harder than a bullet. For the first time in years, Elias felt something stir that was not rage. He took the bread, nodded once, and understood that his war was no longer about vengeance alone. He could ride, as he always had, vanish into the horizon and let Dry Creek drown in its fate. Or he could stand, just once more, and bleed for something greater than himself. By midday, the thunder of hooves shook the earth. The Serrano gang came like a black tide, guns raised, laughter echoing through the storm. Elias stood in the center of the street, revolvers drawn, hat low, rain trickling down his jaw. The first shots came sharp and fast. He moved with brutal precision, firing in bursts, dropping men from their saddles before they could even shout his name. Bullets tore wood from buildings, glass shattered, horses screamed as chaos engulfed the town. The widow fired from a rooftop, her hand steady despite fear clawing her throat. She shot down 2 men who tried to flank Elias, her child hidden beneath the floorboards inside. Townsfolk who had long cowered found their courage and joined, wielding rifles and pitchforks, their voices rising above the storm. Blood mixed with rain in the street. Elias fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He ducked behind barrels, drew a knife across one outlaw's throat, and hurled another into the mud before blasting his chest apart with a single round. His breath came in ragged bursts, but his eyes burned cold. Amid the carnage, he found moments for grim humor. When one bandit charged with a dull hatchet, Elias shot him square in the chest and muttered, "Cheaper than a coffin." Bodies littered the ground, but the fight did not end. From the haze of rain and gunsmoke rode Mateo Serrano, the eldest, broad-shouldered, a shotgun gripped in hands like iron. His face bore no fear, only hunger for blood. He dismounted, boots splashing in the mud, and called Elias by name. The street emptied, silence returning except for the rain. The 2 men faced one another beneath the storm, every eye fixed on them. Elias's fingers twitched near his holster, his heart a steady drum. Mateo raised his shotgun, and the world seemed to hold its breath. They moved at once. Thunder cracked overhead as steel flashed and fire roared. The duel was brutal, merciless, 2 predators colliding in the storm. Elias's shot tore through Mateo's chest, but not before the shotgun boomed, the blast slamming into Elias's side. He staggered, blood spilling into the mud, yet refused to fall. Mateo dropped to his knees, gasping, before the light left his eyes. Elias stood swaying in the silence, the storm finally breaking into a gentle drizzle. The gang was broken, their riders scattered, their reign ended. Dry Creek belonged to its people once more. The widow rushed into the street, rifle still warm, eyes searching for her daughter who now came running from hiding. She clutched the child to her chest, tears mingling with rain, then turned to Elias, gratitude burning through grief. He sank to one knee, hand pressed against the wound in his side. The little girl broke free and knelt beside him, her small hand resting on his cheek. Her eyes glistened, wide with both terror and hope. She begged him not to leave, whispered that God had sent him. Elias forced a faint smile, touched her cheek with blood-stained fingers, and told her not to waste the gift. His voice cracked like the desert earth, but there was peace in it. As the sun pierced the retreating clouds, light spread across the battered town. Smoke curled from broken buildings, bodies lay scattered, yet for the first time in years, Dry Creek breathed free air. Elias's gaze lifted to the horizon one last time, and in it, he saw his wife smile, his son's laughter, and the redemption he thought forever lost. His breath left him slowly, almost gently, as if carried away by the wind itself. The narrator's voice rose like an echo from the desert. Men die quick in the West, but some deaths mean more than the lives that came before them. Elias Kane would be remembered not as an outlaw, not as a killer, but as the man who stood when no one else could. And to those who watched his tale unfold, the voice added, if this story left its mark, don't ride off too fast. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, would you have faced the Serranos in Dry Creek, or would you have ridden into the storm and never looked back?